Good afternoon. Welcome to another rendition of the B&H virtual event space. You are all tuned into a beginner's guide to astrophotography sponsored by Benro. And from Benro, Mr. Michael Bogue down there, and from National Parks at Night, Mr. Matt Hill. Welcome, guys.
How you doing?
Thanks for having us.
Thank you guys for coming on. We're going to be diving into the deep expanses of the universe today. And I do want to remind everybody that if you do have any questions, feel free to get them in. Mike and Matt will be taking those throughout. And if you want to get them in at the end, you can wait until the end as well. But the Q&A is live. If you're joining us from Vimeo, Facebook, live stream, just drop it right in the comment section there. And if you're joining us right here at home on Zoom, we have that lovely Q&A module. But I won't take any more of these guys' time. I'm going to kick it over to you guys.
Just confirm everybody's seeing our screen. Yes.
Looks good.
Wonderful. All right. So Mike and I put our heads together so that we could bring this beginner's guide to astrophotography for you. Mike, do you want to say anything in the opening?
Yeah. So this is a beginner's guide to astrophotography. We'll start off, just talking about what astrophotography is, and then go into, some of the best practices and products as well. But I'll let Matt go ahead and get started.
Great. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Matt Hill. I work with National Parks at Night. My specialty is astro landscape photography, but lately I've gotten the bug for straight up astrophotography. And we're going to talk a lot more about that. Mike, why don't you let everybody know who you are?
Yeah, I'm Mike. I'm from Benro. I'm the brand manager. I've also had a pretty big hand in testing and developing Polaris. And before Polaris, I enjoyed astrophotography, but I was definitely not into it. And now I'm an astronaut. So partially thanks to Matt as well, being a mentor there.
It was my pleasure. Well, let's get into it. What is astrophotography?
What is astrophotography?
What is it? Well, let's start with one that's just coming back around now. A constellation that you typically see in the winter. A beautiful constellation that's very easy to identify because it has that belt in it, Orion. Orion is, wow, it's just gorgeous. It's a beautiful constellation to look at. It's very large in the sky, so you don't need a very long lens. And it does contain many nebulae, or nebulas, nebulae. They're not really visible to the naked eye. So to make a picture like this, you need to use some advanced techniques to capture it.
Yeah. And Matt, I think that my favorite thing about astrophotography is that you could look at this in the night sky and you see those three stars, but then you put a camera on it and do a long exposure, and all of a sudden it just opens it up. Yeah, exactly. And it's just, it would be cool. I mean, taking pictures of stars is nice and whatnot, but seeing what else is out there that you can't see is just the next level.
Absolutely. It makes you wonder, especially seeing something like this, when you look up and you might see the brightest of the stars that you see in this picture. This is near the foot of the constellation Perseus. This is the California Nebula. And gosh, when you nail a shot like this, when you take a picture of the night sky and the stars are sharp, great. That's a great first step. But then when you're able to draw out delicate information like this, it's a major personal achievement. It makes you feel really good.
Yeah, and I think on this one, we'll probably go into it a little bit more in detail, but you used a special practice here, removing some of the filters on the camera as well, right?
Yep. Yeah, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
This was a modified camera. So
yep.
And then there's other areas where you might be able to see more things. The Milky Way is something that we can see with our eyes, if we let our eyes adjust at night. And most people like what's called the galactic core of the Milky Way. That's the famous part of the Milky Way that everybody likes seeing pictures of. This is not in that area. This is in the middle. This is within the constellation Cygnus, or the Swan. And it's amazing what you do when you shoot it the right way. You can see just how many nebulae and deep sky objects are within that. They just start to sparkle. And you want to punch in and shoot with a longer lens and get more detail out of them. But this wider view of the constellation Cygnus is just, it makes you wonder. And that's the beauty of astrophotography. It's really the enjoyment and the study of and the capturing of possibility and history and just how infinitesimal we are in this gigantic, whatever it is, multiverse even, right? So
well, yeah, I mean, even in this photo, you can see, I mean, just how big everything is. You see, obviously, the core part with the big cloud there, but then you can look and you see all these stars that make it up, and you see some H alpha stuff in there as well. The closer you look, there's just so many details up in the night sky that it's unreal.
it is. And then you might use a little bit, longer of a lens, and you start to see things like one of the closest galaxies to us, which is the Andromeda galaxy. Now you can see this with the naked eye under moonless skies, but then you take a photograph of it and then you realize there's two similar spiral galaxies here. There's the Andromeda galaxy, the bigger one, and then just above it you'll see another one tilted at the opposite, at like a 90-degree angle. And when you start to see those things and you really start to wonder what's going on, and you read up a little bit on the astronomy, it just makes you realize how much we do and how much we don't know.
Yep.
Yeah. And then our
Great.
closest, go ahead, Mike.
No, go ahead. I was gonna say great shot.
Oh, thanks, man. Thanks. And then you have things that like our closest satellite, the moon, our only satellite. You've seen probably thousands of pictures of the moon, but how many have you made of the moon that are sharp and well exposed? And that's fun because most people shoot it at too long a shutter speed, and we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
And then there's my specialty, which is shooting the sky and the landscape together. And really you can see that the stars portion of this is extra, extra, extra sharp, and that's the galactic core, and this is just a portion of it, but the landscape is also sharp too, and that requires a different skill set to shoot both of them at the same time. But this is when you get really good at astrophotography, you can then work on astro landscape photography. You can shoot them separately. So you can also do other advanced things, like you can track the sky images when making a panorama and then take slower images on the bottom. And we'll talk about how this is done a little bit later. Or you can get a larger vertical shot where you track the sky and you don't track the land. But if you needed a more of a vertical view, you can do that. So this is 3 images put together. But let's just talk about why astrophotography first. And this is fun. It's in the news, right? You start to hear about things when I was younger, like the Hubble telescope was a big deal. We started seeing things we'd never seen before. And now we have the Webb telescope. And here's this wonderful image that NASA allows us to use, where you can see on the left, you have the Hubble image that was really wonderful, and the James Webb telescope, which uses near infrared, on the right, and how different those images are and what we can learn from all these things. They can test hypotheses about how things work or how they began or where we're going. And all of this just fuels the imagination of wondering why are we, where are we, and how are we? And it's just fascinating to be even a tiny, tiny part of capturing some of these things.
Yeah, it's really impressive just how far the technology's come in the last, 20, 30 years, and just all the details. I mean, there's images that aren't just pillars of creation. There's a picture of Jupiter in infrared that, shows a whole different view of it, things that you would never be able to see without this technology or without using cameras.
Yeah. And this one came out earlier this year that really blew my mind, just seeing how many galaxies there are in this tiny little field of view. It just blows my mind. And our minds are not big enough to comprehend the vastness of space, but it's still really fun to try and capture a little bit of it. So yeah, that's what we do. And this is what scientists do with astro imaging. And this is what little people like us do with astro imaging. So then, and it's undeniable.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, man. It's undeniable that advances in science and easy to obtain technologies make it easier for us to observe and capture and dream about the cosmos. That's really the core of it. It's like you can do it, and it's the barrier to entry just is getting lower and lower. And one of those core technologies that we're going to talk about during this is a star tracker. you know. And a lot, no, these images, nearly all of them, I think I used the Benro Polaris to make them, you know, and regular camera gear. But let's start off fulfilling our promise to you and talking about some of the hows, right? There are some specific challenges in astrophotography that you'll have to navigate. And the first one that you're going to notice is focusing. Focusing is tough. Autofocus doesn't really work on stars with most cameras. Uh, so the best advice that I can give you is to get a Botanoff mask.
1000% agree. Yeah, I think my biggest challenge with Astro, beyond I could have the best tracked image, and I go back to my computer and look at these photos and I'm out of focus, or and it's the most frustrating thing. And not being able to autofocus or even use the back screen on your camera to pixel peep at 11.9 times digital zoom, it's still really hard to visually get focus. And these Bodna mask or focus on stars, these really help a lot.
Yeah. Infinity is not infinity on your lens. That's the beginning and the end of the story, and this will help you achieve more reliable, consistent focus. There's a link here, npan.co/bgfocus. You can learn more about the focusing tips there. We on our blog in national parks, we provide 8 different ways. There's a great blog post, and on the right there's another link there. You guys can type this in a little bit later when you're watching on the replay. GB focus on stars. There's a little bit more information about that Botanoff mask there and why we prefer it. So, but that's the first thing you need to focus. The second thing you need to do is make star points. So let's talk about what's going on. There's a lot of motion going on. Nothing is still. There's no absolute stillness. I'll tell you that. And here's why. Everything is moving. Your job is to counter this movement with either very short shutter speeds or a tracker to get longer shutter speeds at a lower ISO. If you take away anything from this graphic, it's that our perception of stillness is a gift because we are hurtling through the cosmos at breakneck speeds on a rotating spiral. Absolutely nothing is still. So what does that look like in pictures? Well, if I took a 240-second picture on a tripod, and this is 2.8 ISO 1000, the landscape is sharp. Let's punch in on that, right? You see along the bottom edge, the landscape is sharp, yet the stars trail because the Earth is spinning and rotating around the sun in our solar system, and it's tilted. So all of those things happen. When you put it on a star tracker, what you're doing is countering against that motion. So if you need to make star point photos on a tripod without a tracker, you have to use a very short shutter speed. And it's tied to your sensor's size and the resolution plus the focal length through a complicated bit of math.
Very complicated.
Yeah, you don't even want to know about it. But there's an easy way to find out what that shutter speed should be. It's called the NPF rule, and you can get it through the app called PhotoPills. But when you take a really short exposure so that your stars are star points, it's dark and it's noisy because you have to use a very short shutter speed and a very high ISO. The alternative is to use a star tracker. So this image is shot at the same 240 seconds at a slightly higher ISO 1600, but look at those stars. They're star points, right? But the land is blurring. So this is the Earth moving. That's what that blurry edge is right there. Boop, right there. That's the Earth moving, but us having the stars stay stationary. So we're counteracting that movement. Note that the ground is sharp when you're on a tripod and the stars trail. And the opposite is true when tracking the star. When tracking, the stars are sharp and the ground gets blurry. This is not a concern if you're going for straight astrophotography. But in astro landscape photography, it really makes a difference because you're going to shoot 2 different images or more and blend them together using masking techniques. So this image is the stars on top tracked and on the bottom a static image and put together. So, but we're talking about astrophotography here. But that was an illustration to show you that the land and the stars don't move at the same rate. They're going in opposite directions. So our goal is this. We need to make stars that look like stars, not miniature star trails. So where do we start? Well, if you wanted to start, and feel free to take a screenshot of this, or this is being recorded, you can always come back to the replay. If you have no tracker, no big deal. Put on a wide angle lens, set it to ISO 6400, set to 30 seconds and f2.8, and do that focusing that we talked about. And you'll see stars, right? But those stars will trail at 30 seconds, right? But this is just to get you comfortable with shooting at night. Once you get comfortable, then you open up your photo pills and you get that NPF shutter speed, which is from the Spot Stars pill within photo pills. And then you go to ISO 6400 or 12800 and f2.8 if your lens can do that, and use that other shutter speed instead of 30 seconds. That is the longest you can leave your shutter open without the stars trailing, right? So when you get this, great, that's wonderful, right? You've got an image that has star points, but everything else is really dark. So you employ a method called star or noise stacking, which really means you shoot that same image 5 times or up to 20 times. And through post-processing, you can make that ISO 6400 image look like it was shot at ISO 800.
Yeah.
And the software you use for that on a Mac is called Starry Landscape Stacker, and the software you use on a PC is called Sequator. And that reduces high ISO noise levels. So it's either called star point stacking or it's called noise stacking.
And the nice thing is these apps are very easy to use. It's pretty much drag and drop, and then they kind of walk you through as well. So there's no reason to be afraid to start stacking your images.
Yeah. Just if you want to get into it, just start. But you got to capture it in the field. So if you can shoot one image that's star points, you can shoot 5, or you can shoot 15 or 20. So I recommend 20. So if you had a tracker and a wide angle lens, then you could drop down from ISO 12,800 or 6,400 down to like 800, maybe up to 1,600. And then you can increase your exposure duration from where like 10 to 24 seconds to maybe 30 to 240 seconds, which is a big deal, right? So you can get one image that's superior to the image, the final image that you had to shoot 5 to 20 to make an image, a final image out of before, just with one picture. But you really shouldn't stop there. You should use the same idea again and shoot many of them over and over, so that you can use that same software, Starry Landscape Stacker or Sequator, to take all these star point shots that you did on a tracker and combine them together for an even higher quality image. So that's the fun part. That lower ISO and that longer exposure time on a tracker gives you access to better color rendition. This is the crux. This is why people choose to shoot track shots instead of star points. And it's also standard operating procedure amongst astrophotographers, combining that star point stacking or noise stacking with tracking. Outside of, you could get a cooled image sensor, but that's a
You're going next level.
topic. Yeah, next level for sure.
Also, once you start getting into longer focal lengths, right, you need to definitely have a tracker of some kind, because otherwise you're going to be shooting for 2 to 5 to 10 seconds depending on your focal length.
For sure. Yeah, and it's 2 seconds is not a lot of time. You look at it and you're like, is there any information there, right?
Yeah, well, it's dark out, but
it's super dark. Yeah. So let's take a look at a graph. If you've ever visited dxomark.com and gone into the dynamic range for your camera, this is what you're looking at. This is the Nikon Z6, one of the 2 cameras that I own. And the graph that you see here from left to right is low ISO to high ISO. And you'll see the dynamic range is the vertical axis here. Like, how many stops of information from the darkest information to the highest can I capture at what ISO? And you see, as the ISO goes up over to the right, the quantity or the dynamic range, how many stops of information goes down. But there's a dip, and then it goes back up and then it goes back down. So there's a sweet spot. You can see at 6,400 or 12,800, and let me switch to the next thing. I have a Nikon Z6 II also. There's kind of a sweet spot right here where it's above 12 stops, right? And then there's 6,400 and 12,800, the other places I shoot a lot at, and it's below 10, or it's between 10 and 8 stops of dynamic range. That's a big difference. That's a big difference when it comes to how much color you can capture and how good it looks. So this is why a lot of people choose to track, because they can shoot at an ideal ISO where they get an acceptable or a more acceptable dynamic range. If you want to check out your camera, you can go to dxomark.com and check it out. Or you can perform your own tests to see what is acceptable to you. There's other basic requirements. We're talking about challenges still in astrophotography. You need stuff to do astrophotography. Imagine that, right? You need a tripod. I know it sounds silly, but you absolutely do. For everything I do, I use a tripod, right? I believe you should use a tracking mount for straight astrophotography. You'll be a lot happier than just shooting star points. You need a mirrorless or DSLR camera capable of RAW. You will be shooting in RAW, and a decent, faster lens, but don't go out and break the bank yet. Start with what you have, and when you start to feel disenchanted with the results, then spend up,
Slippery slope.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. It's an upward slope, right? You will need a smartphone because there's apps that are essential to this process. And if you're ever with an Astro group, keep this in mind, you can only use a red light and a headlamp, and make sure that you can dim that down. It can't be full blast red. There's a lot of reasons for your eyes also. After half an hour of not seeing white light, your eyes will adjust and see a lot more than you could. And that includes looking at your phone. So it's kind of a thing.
Yeah, and the red light helps. I believe the wavelength doesn't affect the iris as much, so it'll keep your I guess the aperture of your eye open, so you can see at night a lot better.
Yeah. The flip side is, if you do astro landscape photography, that red light bleeds out into the landscape a lot and can ruin pictures. But we're talking about straight astrophotography here. So, yeah. So remember, this is being recorded. You can take a screenshot, or you can jump back and see it again. There's a bunch of apps that you would use. I'm going to talk about iOS. Some of these have correlations in Android. PhotoPills, absolutely essential. PhotoPills helps photographers plan pictures better. If you're looking for astronomy, identification, and location of stuff in the sky, my go-tos are Sky Guide and Stellarium. And
I use Stellarium.
Yeah, Stellarium is great. Some pro astro guys use Sky Safari Pro because it has tables that can send information to their higher end astronomy equipment. If you need to know about weather, whether it's clear outside, so weather underground or Ventusky or Scott windy, all of those things can help you understand that more. If you're into Aurora, Space Weather Live is good for that. I keep the Polaris app on my phone because I use the Polaris piece of gear to do tracking. And then ICSC, or Clear Outside, if you want to know what the predictions are for your sky being clear, that's great. And just for fun, Flight Radar 24, if you want to know what planes are passing through your images at that very moment.
I use it all the time, actually, because I shoot in my backyard, and I am right on the base turn into Sky Harbor Airport. So if I don't time it out right, I have beautiful long exposures of planes going through all my images. And when you track, you have to get rid of a ton of them. And then by then, it's the whole thing. But I use that app actually a lot more than I ever thought I would in astrophotography.
Amazing. That's cool. So if you're just getting started, now that you've got all this gear and you've got some best practices, right, what should you do? Well, I set my tripod legs to one click wider than normal. There's a danger to that. You could kick them also, but it's more stable if they're one click out than the standard daytime position, right? You would mount your tracker next. You would put your gear on top of that, and then you would proceed to level it with everything, the payload on top of it, and adjust it and make sure that it's dead level.
That's
And then
key.
that's absolutely important. In fact, you can see it in the picture there, but I have this bubble level, which we'll talk about later, that I use every time I set it up. You then, and this is in the software, you'll line the heading, which direction is it facing, and then you pick a star or celestial object to align it with, and then the tracker's ready. After that, on the camera, you use a high ISO test, which I'm not going to go into detail here, but it's just to help you get a proper exposure, and you just need to watch for highlight clipping, making sure your stars don't blow out because there's a lot of color in those stars. And then you
Yeah.
can use that in equivalent exposure, either using photo pills or the math in your head to drop that down to a lower ISO and a longer exposure time. And you will get better as you do this over and over. The first time you do it, you're going to be like, oh my God, these are so many details. I can't remember all of this, but it becomes second nature after your fourth or fifth or 10th.
Yeah, I think my first time going out, it took me 10 minutes just to get it set up, and then figuring everything out, just to take a regular photo with the tripod and just a camera on it. And now I walk outside and I'm ready to go in 2-3 minutes. It doesn't take that long, and especially that's really good, especially going into winter.
Yes.
So, as you know,
oh, winter. Here it is. Well, let's get into some stories then.
Yeah,
let's do this. This was shot in my front yard. And when I say front yard, I mean the concrete next to my house. And I live on Main Street in Catskill, New York. So it's a Bortle 5 sky. And this is an unmodified Nikon Z6 II. All of this color is from a regular camera. And it was noise stacked with Starry Sky Stacker. It was 11 images shot at 70 millimeters at ISO 100, and each shot was 1 minute long. Pretty easy, right? All I had to do was focus. And look at how sharp those stars are. That's crazy. I had no idea there was that much color. In fact, I look at this now and I'm like, I want to go back and reprocess that because the Orion Nebula looks a little blown out.
Matt, which lens did you use by chance?
This was my 24 to 70 millimeter.
Is that a 2.8?
S 2.8. Yeah.
Why are you shooting at f3.5? What would be the advantage of that?
Okay, so there is a thing called coma. Every lens experiences it to some degree or not. This is Nikon Z lens. The S lens is one of the sharpest lenses I've ever owned in my life, but it still experiences a tiny bit of coma at 2.8. So I wanted to eliminate those strangely shaped stars at the edges. So I stopped down 2/3 of a stop.
Okay.
Yep. So that's why I did that, for that little bit of extra sharpness and making sure that the corner stars were star shaped.
It's good to know. Yeah, that was one of the first tips you gave me, because I was like, what is all this stuff going around the outside? And it's like these little curves, and I couldn't fix it. And once I started stopping down, which sometimes I don't listen and I still shoot wide open, it really did help my images.
Yeah. I mean, some people don't care about that. They don't mind the stars not looking like stars at the images. When you're shooting straight astro, it makes a difference. The reason we do it is if something distracts the viewer, then it probably wasn't a good practice. And stars that don't look like stars can be distracting. So we try to avoid that if possible. Next up. So this is not a single unprocessed image. That's the next stage of the build. Ignore that for now. This is 57 images shot at 200 millimeters. ISO 800, 80 seconds each at f3.2. And they were processed through Starry Sky Stacker. Why did I shoot 57 images? Well, there was wind. There was unavoidable vibrations. I was pacing around. I was drinking coffee, and you need to overshoot the quantity of images you think you're going to need, because when you get it into the star stacking software, it will tell you, I'm going to choose this many based on your criterion, and I'm only going to use the best of them, and I'm going to discard the rest of them when I'm building the final image. So
yeah, I mean, also, I like I said, I have the planes flying over all the time. You also have satellites in your images that you might not want in there as well. I mean, with the number of satellites up there nowadays, you can get literal trails through your images of the same satellite, getting little reflections off of it. I have dogs, like you said, walking around, and there's just unavoidable stuff. Also, a little bit of atmospheric, if there's any anything up there, you can get rid of those shots as well. I mean, there could be a passing cloud every once in a while. It just
you're not going to
there's so
see
many reasons to shoot more images than 5 or 10 or
for sure. You're not going to see it until you get it back on the computer. So you might shoot 1 or 2 or maybe 3 at the most of deep sky objects in a night, you know.
Well, especially like I just set it and I have it kind of go in auto and I go back inside where it's warm and, you know, I have stuff to do. So I let this go. 57 images at 80 seconds each is a long time. It's an hour plus. So
it is.
That's another nice thing. A lot of this stuff can be automated.
Yeah, you can go back in and read a book. Or you can do what I do and run a second camera or a third. I was running a film camera down on the shore of South Lake at the same time. So
I gotta see those.
I haven't shared those yet.
Okay.
Actually, those are still in camera. I didn't get those processed yet. So in the inset here, you can see how gray it says single unprocessed image there. That's what one image looks like. When you stack them all up, you get this better color range, and then you cook it to taste at the end. So when you see one image, you might be like, why am I doing this? It's when you add them all up and you process it that you can draw out all the detail like this. So we talked about this Cygnus shot before. I was hanging out with the New York City Amateur Astronomers Association, which is AAA.org, because they hang out near me up at South Lake in the Catskills. This was at the zenith, at the darkest portion of the sky. It was straight above the head. And this is 70 millimeters, 70 images, ISO 800, 2 minutes each at f3.5. And I'm really stunned at how it came out, because I certainly did not see this with my eyes. And there's other things within that constellation that I want to shoot, and I'll work on shooting them over the winter. So there's a whole bunch of nebulae in there that I really want to go after. And
you're able to bring some more of that detail out with your modified camera, right?
Yeah. No, so this is the Z6 II. This is my unmodified camera.
Oh, really?
No kidding. God. Yeah.
Yeah. Right, I need to get out there and try Cygnus, because I think Cygnus is still up.
Yeah.
So
oh yeah.
It's like the very last part of the Milky Way core, right?
It's almost the center.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, right now it's in the middle of the sky at the middle of the night. So yeah. This one is Andromeda. This is probably the third time I've gone after Andromeda.
M31. Yep.
My 70 to 200 was otherwise occupied, so I shot this with my 24 to 70 millimeter, and it still fills the frame pretty good. You could crop this as if it was an APS-C sensor, and gosh, there's a startling amount of detail there.
Yeah, this is my my white whale almost. I try to capture this all the time, and you'll see my image next, but to get the level of detail that I want, where you can like pick out individual stars within the galaxy, I shoot this probably every 2 to 3 nights, and you can see in my shot, I'm nowhere near Matt's level, so forgive me. But this is from my backyard. I live in the middle of Phoenix, and I'm still able to, with a track shot,
it's gorgeous,
get on and try to capture these galaxies. I'm shooting at ISO 800. I'm doing 30-second shots. F4.9, I'm using a prime 250 millimeter fixed aperture lens. So that's why I used f4.9. But, you know, even in the middle of the city, when you're doing these long exposures, you can still get these, you know, crazy details. So my next step is to go out and, you know, start trying to capture this on a moonless night.
What camera are you using?
This is an A7 R4A. So
beautiful.
Yeah, I got to work on my processing. That's where I struggle, especially. I might give this one to you, but I also only shot 5 images. So I could have gone a lot more. I could have changed my exposure values, dropped down the ISO, gone to 60 seconds. This is more of a running gun. I have 10 minutes kind of shot.
Well, maybe the next presentation we'll team up for is post-processing your Astro stuff. Yeah. Sound good. Here's the longest focal length that I own, which is a Mac 90 telescope. It's an effective 1200 millimeter focal length on a full frame camera. And this is uncropped. This was a single photograph that is 20th of a second at f13.8, which is, you can't change the aperture on this because it's a catadioptric or a mirror telescope. So I didn't have any choice. It's easy to focus on the moon at f13.8 because it's so darn bright, but it moves very fast.
Yeah,
moves so fast.
Yeah, I was actually shocked at how bright the moon was the first time I tried to properly shoot it.
Yeah,
I mean, you can point your cell phone up at there, even the camera in auto mode or something, and it will take it for you. But I actually shoot this mainly in like 1/125 shutter speed. It really varies. Obviously, you're shooting at a really stop down aperture there, but yeah, it's surprisingly bright. Same with planets. Yeah. I was shooting Jupiter and Saturn, and you look up in the sky and yeah, they're the brightest thing in the sky if the moon's not up. But same shutter speed pretty much. I was trying to shoot it at a second long or longer. I think I was actually trying in bulb mode the first time, thinking it would be like a star, but you have to go really fast.
Yeah, they're super bright if you want any sort of highlight control.
And then I did it. I'm like, oh, there's the rings, there's the spot. It's pretty cool actually. There's some fun stuff up there.
Jupiter's been looking good for the last month. See a lot of those moons.
I think.
Oh, look at this.
So this is my shot, but what I did is, this obviously isn't one shot. I was tracking this with the Polaris, I think in May, and I actually captured it all the way through, basically the eclipse. So I did it from when it came up above the horizon from my backyard. And the nice thing is light pollution doesn't really affect the eclipse too much. It's so bright. And I was able to, I actually have it vertically and it's my phone background, but this is one of my favorite shots I ever took. It was so easy. I literally it was over 3 or 4 hours. I just went back inside, took a shot every couple of minutes to save space in my SD card because the A7R4 files are massive. But then, you do some fun stuff in Photoshop and align them, and it makes for a pretty cool image.
This is amazing.
In my opinion.
So amazing. Hey, if any of you want to shoot a lunar eclipse, and if you're not aware of it, the last total lunar eclipse until 2025 is on November 8th, 5:17 a.m. to 6:42 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Get up early.
I'm on the West Coast, Matt. That's early.
I know.
I'll do it.
We have one of our last workshops out in Death Valley at that time. The guys that are out there were like, no, we're going to be asleep.
So stay up.
I mean, yeah. If you're in Asia, Australia, Pacific, or the Americas, you can see this. So it's a pretty big area that can see this total lunar eclipse. So check it out.
Check it out.
And then this is just another, I'm going to move into some astro landscape stuff, and I'll sort of breeze through this a little bit. I don't want to belabor the point, but when you shoot the land, the stars move. When you shoot the stars, the land moves, and then you can blend them together. So you shoot two different things. The land shot was ISO 800, 255 seconds. Sky shot was ISO 400, 240 seconds. And then through Photoshop, composite those two together to become one photograph.
Or Lightroom.
Or Lightroom.
I do.
Yeah. It's hard.
There's some really good masking tools. I mean, obviously you can cut it yourself, but even in Lightroom, there's like select sky and it masks it out automatically. Makes it really easy. But I mean, if you want to go into crazy details, you can pixel peep, but it's not as long of a process as I thought it was. So I got that tip 6 months ago, and it's changed my life.
Nice. So you can also take pictures during dusk, and then then you get these sharp shots here. Oops, there we go. So sharp bottom, sharp top, that's the goal, right? I promised I'd talk about this one. This is I took 3 images, one of them dead level for just the ground, and I shot that during dusk. And then I shot here we go. And then so that second one I put up as the dusk shot. The top one is the frame that I shot with the sky tracked. And here we go. I got to go through this again to show you. And then I blended those together. So this is actually just 2 images put together. So the sky got a little bit taller, and it extended the frame to almost a 1-to-1, a square. And through blending, you can make them come together. And then this one is probably the most complicated example that I'll show you guys. But a lot of people want to go after this because it's kind of a holy grail shot, where you take a panorama, and the panorama, you make 2 passes. The first pass is where you track the sky So 7 images, 50% overlap each of them, and they're tracked. Each image, it's moving. So the sky, the edge, the land is moving in each of these shots, but the stars are sharp. So those 7 images got blended, ISO 1600. They are each 2 minutes long at f2.8. And then another image was shot with just the ground, and I tilted down some to get more of the landscape on purpose. And that was ISO 12,800, 30 seconds at f4 for a little bit more depth of field. And that was 7 images. And then I blended the two together to become this. So you can use this as inspiration. Once you master tracking, you can then combine it with some landscape elements if you want to not just have only stars.
Obviously, Matt, are you shooting this at blue hour, or is this at night, like a long night exposure for the landscape?
This was inspired by moonset. Moonset had just happened.
Okay.
But I was helping other people at the time. So I set up my Luxley fiddle on a 10-foot stand, and I put it exactly where the moon was setting only half an hour before, and created that light that looks just like the moon set so that I could shoot it. So, yep. But I saw what the moonlight looked like. Yeah, it's just, and this is what you could do when you control lighting too. Oh gosh. All right. So now we said you have to talk about gear. So I'm gonna let Mike take the helm here.
Sure. Okay. So Matt obviously started off with the setup and a very sturdy tripod. You kind of want to choose for the scenario that you're going into. So a carbon fiber tripod's pictured here. That's mainly if you're going to be, going off the beaten path a little bit. It's lighter to carry. As Matt, I'm sure, can attest to, having a lighter kit or a lighter bag is, kind of key, especially if you're going, I think that was what, Goblin Valley, Matt, or something like that.
Coastal's in Utah.
Yeah. So if you are hiking too much, you definitely want to have the lightest stuff. On the flip side, a lot of times if I'm shooting in my backyard, I'll use an aluminum tripod, something a little bit heavier. That gives you that sturdiness that you're looking for. Well, that's the Mammoth. That's the Mach 3, I think. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be Mach 3, and that's going to be a little bit sturdier, a little heavier. And you just want to make sure that you're not getting, you want to minimize your vibrations. And that's really key, especially where I live. I live by a busy street. I have 2 dogs that are crazy and massive, and they ruin more pictures than I care to think about. Yeah, just the right gear is key. Also, for any of the tracking heads, a leveling base, so the LBA2 from Benro. One of the nice things about this is once you have your tripod set up, if you're on a hill or any kind of sloped land, and you're trying to get the Polaris level, not only can you use an external leveling bubble like Matt showed in one of his images, there's also one built in here, so you have kind of a cross reference. And what you do is you just loosen that knob, and now you can just do this instead of having to fiddle with your legs. And the last one is something more that Matt uses than I do. I screw my Polaris tripod head onto the tripod. Matt uses a quick release plate, which if you're doing it as much as Matt is doing, it makes a lot of sense. But I'm always changing out my gears, so it doesn't necessarily work for me. There is a 3/8/16 mount on the bottom of the Polaris that just screws on to 99.9% of tripods. There's also a ARCA adapter there, so you can, on most photo tripod heads, you can just put it on and screw it in, and that's more for speed if you don't want to have to take off your ball head.
Yep.
The Mammoth. Okay, so this one's like the best balance because not only is it light because it's made of carbon fiber, but it is like the sturdiest tripod that we make, and it has the built-in leveling base. So basically, you just loosen it, level it, and you're ready to go once you're level. And if you're using a tracker. And then Matt threw in the quick release plate again there. He's trying to
I like it.
Yeah. So but yeah, definitely. So if unless you want to spend way too much time trying to fix the legs constantly, just a leveling base or a leveling ball is ideal. You definitely want to invest in a good level as well. I've used my phone and I'm kind of starting to regret it because it's not 100% accurate on your cell phone. From what I found, especially when you cross-reference between what's in your camera, a true spirit level, or some of the crazy digital levels that are out there. Just yeah, make sure that you have a good spirit level, at least.
If you already have a tripod, then just add a balancing head.
Yeah, the LBA2 is perfect. It's pretty reasonable, and all you do is you take the head off the tripod, put this on there, and you can put your regular tripod head back on there, or put the Polaris on there. And this one's nice too because it has the 3/8 adapter spring in the middle, so you can use it with the 3/8 head, or you can just put technically you could put a camera on there too with the 1/4-20 because the little outside portion goes down.
You don't have to worry about losing the bushing. That's nice. And would you suggest the Benro Polaris Astro Edition?
I do, for sure. Okay. So obviously I'm with Benro, but the number one reason that this head is convenient is that you don't have to do a polar alignment. You can choose any object in the night sky. Right now, Jupiter is incredibly bright. You could use the moon. You can basically, all you do is you go into the app. Once this is turned on, you align using the phone's compass. It will literally turn to whatever object in the sky that you choose. You center that object in the middle of your camera's viewfinder and the app, which has live view between the camera and the app. And you hit, this is where that object is. Mm-hmm. Once it knows where that object is, it can go to anything else with precision and track from there. Very handy for deep sky stuff. If you aren't able to see with the naked eye something up there, mm-hmm. Or if you just can't see Polaris, if there's a mountain in the way, if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, there's a lot of scenarios where this is, it's advantageous to have this head.
Yeah. Mike, well, I'm going to talk about accessories, but if you wanted to share the videos, I think that there's some great, Benro put out some great videos that I think Mike engineered about how to understand what the Polaris is and what it does and how to set it up. I've found them really educational, mm-hmm. even after using it for almost a year. So
yeah, well, not only does it walk you through the setup, but I think the best tell of the entire setup video is that the video is not that long, because the process is very quick and easy. Yeah. And the video goes step by step, but once you do it once or twice and you have the process down, I can literally get this tracking any object I want within 2 minutes without doing a polar alignment.
Very nice. Can't say that about other ones. I mean, I've gotten pretty quick at using equatorial mounts, but mm-hmm. this is pretty darn fast.
Yeah.
So, when you're using this, there's going to be some other accessories that I strongly consider using. We talked about this already. A bottom-off mask, such as the Focus on Stars, which yep. I currently believe is the best one. You have to have this. Otherwise, you're going to cry.
So yeah, well, you're not guessing. Like, it literally just makes like a cross on your star or on the focus point, and it just takes all the guesswork out, really. You just know it's in focus and yep. take it out and shoot.
Yeah, you're wasting your time if you're not in focus.
Yeah.
So just do it. And then there's a bubble level. So if you get one that's a 0.1% accuracy, you can place that on top of the Polaris yep. and get yourself within the 0.3 that they recommend for absolute balancedness or level. I often put a nodal rail underneath my camera, or you can use a long quick release plate, such as the one that's shown here, the Benro PL150. Mm-hmm. And because you can charge the Benro Polaris at the same time, it has a USB-C port on it right down here. You can plug in an external battery pack, although you probably won't need it because the battery on this is a champ.
Yeah.
But you can make sure it doesn't run out by plugging in that, and you can also plug in other things we're going to talk about in the next slide.
Yeah. Also, going back to the plate, I shoot a lot with telescopes. Mm-hmm. I have a 650 millimeter Celestron, and it's a large telescope. So in order for me to mount to the telescope, I have to use a plate, and I use the PL150 actually, and I'm able to slide and balance the telescope on the Polaris. That way it's not, all back heavy or all top heavy, for two reasons. It makes it obviously much smoother process for tracking, and also so I don't do the old flop over. Yeah. I won't tell you my stories, but luckily I was on grass. So
yeah, you're working in the dark. Yeah. Every safety precaution you can take is the best.
I bumped it with my leg, and I'm going to start listening to you, even though it'll be wider and I might bump it more often. At least it's not going to fall over. So
yeah, you can get reflector tape or glow in the dark tape and put it on the bottom of your tripod legs so you can see where they are. So that's something that we often do. I mean, I was with the Astro group, and they're not used to people spreading the tripod legs so wide. My tripod got kicked once or twice anyway. I did it once, so I mean, we're all human, not perfect.
Yep.
Other things you might want to consider is if you live in a place that's not as dry as where Mike lives, when the dew point breaks, when there's humidity, condensation will form on your lens, especially if you're pointed upwards towards the stars. So there are electronic dew straps, such as the one from MSM, which has 3 different heating levels. And this you would plug into the USB power bank. And that's where the tether tool strap more comes in, that holds the power bank to your tripod leg. Or you can get a chemical hand warmer version of that. Kevin made this lens muff thing that's awesome. You can
just actually put the hand warmers in there.
You put the you open it up, put hand warmers in there, and strap it to your lens.
That's awesome.
Why does this work? Because you keep the glass of your lens warmer than the ambient air, then the water doesn't form on it.
Yep.
It's that simple. All right. Well, there's other things you might want to think about using, but let's keep moving along as we sort of wind down in this presentation. Here's some settings to use to get your first shots with a tracker. ISO 6400 f2.8 30 seconds. It's going to be a little bright, right? But you should check your focus, right? Drop your ISO if it's too bright. Look at your histogram. I'm showing you a histogram here just to show you. This is all the information. All this is the dark area there, right? And then all this little bright stuff over on the right-hand side where it says 80 seconds there. Your highlights, you shouldn't be clipped. You know, you shouldn't see it running off the right-hand side. This, of course, is from Lightroom. You should be looking on your camera to make sure you don't clip those. It's all about comfort, achieving comfort. When you get comfortable with shooting dark images that have some brightness in them, then you can start dropping your ISO and going to longer exposures. And what you do is you keep extending that, dropping your ISO down until the stars trail a little bit, and then go back one stop until they don't. And that's your sweet spot for the night. So there is the highlights that you want to watch out for. And there's the information. Look at that. I already explained these things. All right. Winding down, there's 2 common questions that we'll answer before they show up in the Q&A. And by the way, since we're winding down, if you have questions, please ask them now so we can get to them. The first one is, what's the difference between an equatorial mount and a 3-axis tracker?
Go for it, Matt.
I'll try. So,
right.
So there's a couple of things that I want to call out from personal experience. An equatorial mount counter rotates off of the Earth's axis, right? So you need to set it up so you're pointing towards the North Star. If the North Star is not visible, or the constellation, if you're in south of the equator, if the constellation that you need isn't visible for you to align on, it's very hard to do an accurate polar alignment. So you kind of have to wait for darkness. With the Benro Polaris or any go-to tracker, you can do a setup at any time as long as there's an object for you to confirm on. So that setup is a big part of it, right? And when you can set up. The Benro does require a cell phone for control, but those other equatorial mounts also require an app to tell you where on the polar clock you need to set it to. So there's just tangible differences between having to look through a little optical scope inside of a tracker or use a laser to point at Polaris versus what I find to be the easier setup with the Benro, where you tell it which direction it's facing in, go find an object and confirm it and hit track. That's one thing, how you set up. The other thing is the go-to function of a 3-axis tracker like the Polaris. You can say, go find this thing, and it goes zzz, and it goes and it points at it, and then you start taking pictures. If you don't have that, those other trackers that aren't go-to mounts, you need to go figure out where it is in the sky, beginning and the end of it. The third most tangible thing that I know that's different between all other trackers and this one, the Benro Polaris has a ton of other cool features that aren't just strictly astro. You can do programmed time lapses, you can do focus stacking, you can do HDR focus stacking, and you can make mechanized panoramas, which is near and dear to my heart. You can say single row or multi-row panos and just program it in. and it will take the pictures for you, both static and tracked panoramas. So if you're into panos, it's amazing. So
it'll do that for astro and for just regular, landscape or architectural. It's pretty handy there.
It is. And that one shot that I showed you, I used it for the ground and the sky, the Polaris, for both of those, and it just worked out perfectly.
And funny enough, I thought I'd be doing more astro with the Polaris when I first heard about this and whatnot. I do motion time lapses most of the time now. I go from A to B and just do I'll hang out. I'll do it when I'm eating dinner. I was in Mexico and I just set it up next to our dinner table and did the sunset. It was fun. They're like my favorite things that have come out of the Polaris. Sometimes I'm not a processing master like you, Matt, but I'll get there. I'll catch you one day and then I'll be using it more for that. But yeah, motion time lapses.
You'll lap me soon. Yeah. So there's more details than that, but those are how I see the differences between the equatorial mount and the 3-axis tracker.
Yeah.
The other common question is, should I stack star points at a higher ISO or should I track the stars? Dead seriously, you should start by star point noise stacking. Just start that way. And if that quality doesn't suffice for your needs, then look into a star tracker. Feel good?
Yeah, and there's some good programs out there for stacking star points, especially a Starry Landscape Stacker. I mean, the nice thing is that you just take a bunch of images, and even though the stars you're rotating, it'll pick everything and make a really nice image for you.
The most important thing is that you're shooting and you're growing and you're learning and you're making images and you're learning from it. Just get out there and get shooting, and the rest will follow. So that's that. I think it's time for some questions. I see a couple of them rolling in. So
they are rolling in.
No, I see a couple.
Just ignore anything that comes from Scott Jolson in the waiting room. Everything else is on the table. I know you guys can see them. I don't know if you guys want to jump in and anywhere you want to start.
Yeah, I see one here. Michael, I'm in Tucson. Can you give me a ballpark? Hey neighbor, can you give me a ballpark settings to shoot Saturn A7R3 and a Sony 200-600G? Okay. So I'm in Phoenix, and I actually shot Saturn twice in the last month. It was all around the same time as when Jupiter was at opposition. I started off with Jupiter. I learned my lessons with the shutter speed. My settings, I use a Celestron 650 millimeter equivalent with an aperture of f6.3 or f6.8, and so you can take those settings, and one of the nice things is you can put these into photo pills. Shutter speed's 1/125, and I was shooting at ISO 100. I like shooting at the lower ISO. I think if you look on DxO, the dynamic range of the A7R4A is the highest ISO is at 100, and I think that was for yours too as well. And I'm using the tracker, and basically it's able to track the planet perfectly, so I can be adjusting my settings and playing with it. But with the 200-600, I believe that's f4 to f5.6, somewhere around there. So you can almost get the same settings as me. You also might want to consider a teleconverter. The 2.0x teleconverter for the 200-600 would come in handy, in my opinion, to get really tight. Because even when I'm at 11.9x on my rear screen, I'm taking photos, but when I'm looking at it, I'm still having to go 11.9x just to see those rings really clearly. So definitely get a teleconverter. Yeah, f6-ish, 1/125, and low ISO, but you can play with that. That's the nice thing. It's not just copy and paste. It's going to be different, and depends on what you're trying to capture. Jupiter as well, and you can get the moons in there too, and it's really cool being able to see Jupiter, and then 3 moons. I was able to see 3 moons. So
Mike, how is it with seeing the rings? Because I've never seen the rings in an image.
So,
is it one of those things where like with the Milky Way or with the Aurora Borealis, where you really have to pull it out in processing, or how prevalent is
I was able to see it on the back of my camera screen just by punching in. So I was out the first night, did that, was blown away. I showed my son, and he's like, "Dad, we need to go out tonight." So that was kind of a really fun bonding moment, beyond just capturing and trying to make art or whatever you want to call it, exploring the night sky. But it was a fun, father-son thing. So.
Right. And David just followed up. What if I go to my A6600 and get it to 900?
So that's how I kind of cheat too. So, it's you can. It's if you're going from an A7 R3, you're losing some of the pixel count there. So it's, do you want the digital, or do you want to have the crop factor on your sensor? It's really up to you. But once you put it into Lightroom, it's probably gonna look pretty similar.
I'll jump in here. I use the full frame sensor mode most of the time, but sometimes, like when I put a 600 millimeter on, I go into DX mode, crop sensor mode on my Nikon to shoot moon rises or moon sets. It's all about the end result, right? So you use the gear that you have to the best of your ability, and if crop sensor mode on the full frame camera looks better than the crop sensor camera, or vice versa, go with the one that works. I'd say shoot both of them and compare them, and then for next time.
Perfect. Now we'll roll that in right next to the next question from Rick joining us on Facebook, who's asking the best focal length. It's kind of, if we can open that up and kind of explore that a little bit. What's the minimum for Astro? Where's the minimum you want to be at to really see anything? Or is there any suggestions that you guys have for the best lenses?
I mean, it depends.
11, 12 millimeters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can go as wide as you want. I mean, I wouldn't recommend fisheye necessarily. You can do fisheye stuff.
Sure.
But the nice thing about like doing tracked panoramas as well is you can also get wider. So with deep sky, you want whatever, you probably want to be as tight as you can on your object, and at least in my opinion. It all varies based on who you're asking, but like if I'm shooting Andromeda, my white whale, I'm going to try to get, probably like a 6. You don't want to go to 1200 because then you're losing a lot of that galaxy.
Yeah.
Maybe like 600 and a 1.5, like 900 millimeters, like we were just talking about. But and then wide fields, you could do a single shot with tracking, or you can even use like a 70 or 24 to 70 and be at 70 millimeters, and then do panorama sections for a lot of detail and have a huge like gigapixel style image, but like with tracked Astro. It's a hard question to answer, really.
And I'm going to go out on a limb here from my limited use of really, I don't go into the Astro world much. This is for you guys, but this is where it really, there's times when you can skimp on gear and you can get away with anything, but when you're at those, I mean, I can't even imagine shooting at that focal length. If you don't have a super incredibly solid tripod or something where you can adjust to like just micro make the smallest micro adjustments, it's not even, I mean, it can ruin the experience. Correct?
For sure. Like we have our 3-way geared head from Benro, where you can, if you're shooting stacked or static images, you can really fine tune. Even with the Polaris, you could just take the knobs and you can actually turn them manually, and you could dial in, I think it's 0.0001 degree per click. So that's for the motor to operate and track, but you can manually do it too, and you can have really crazy precise shots manually if you wanted to. But I mean, if you don't have sturdy gear when you're doing Astro, you saw Matt's images, any movement shows up, because the second you put light on that sensor, it's going to record it and it's going to stay there. And you have to, if you're stacking, hopefully you're stacking, then you're going to have to get rid of it, not use that image.
Yeah. And I even know, I mean, just in taking moonshots with at probably half, if not more than half the focal length of what you guys are doing these photos at, it's like the slightest little bit you can't, it's like I'm either too far left, too far right, because I don't have one of these nice fancy tripods. So let me just throw that caveat in there. So and
the camera store that could get you one.
I know, where could I possibly find one? I like an old sitting in the back of the trunk tripod there, but it's like I noticed, it's like, man, after a certain while, a certain amount of time, it's like not even worth doing it because you can't make these little adjustments. And it's like it got to a certain point where you're tightening your tripod and just kind of hitting the side of the camera just to make small adjustments.
Sometimes it almost makes sense just to handhold at that point, but
totally.
Moon moves a little bit faster than you think.
Here's what I'd like to say to people who are wondering about what to invest. Anything that touches the ground is something you don't want to skimp out on, and that goes for shoes, tires, mattresses, and tripods. Like
Love that.
they all increase your quality of life or your ability to do things, like that are enjoyable, like in the photography sense, having a really rock solid, dependable tripod that you operate in the dark, just means that you're going to enjoy everything that comes after. If you're fidgeting with the tripod or if it fails on you, all of the effort it took to be in that place at that time was wasted. So cheaping out on that, and I don't want to say that, is probably the worst choice you can make, because you got to work from the bottom up when it comes to quality. So
Perfect.
But at the same time, if you have a lower cost tripod and that's what you have, it's still better than, my very first Astro shot that I can remember. I was in Flagstaff, Arizona at 12,000 feet on Mount Humphreys, and I drove my truck up there and I put my camera on the roof of the truck and pointed it straight up. And that was my tripod. So no extra costs. Yeah. And, I didn't get the best shot, but it was the star trailing style. And I thought it was super cool. And I posted on Instagram and it's still there.
Yeah. Oh, nice.
I haven't deleted it out of shame or anything.
Mike's upgraded since then.
Yeah, a little bit.
So we'll get to these last two questions here. And then, David, I see you got another one in. We do have Matt and Mike's emails up there. Yeah. So we can reach out. If anybody has any questions you want to reach out, I'm sure they're going to be open to it. Willie, joining us on Vimeo, owns a 14mm Canon EF 1.2 rectilinear lens for architecture. Level it when shooting for no keystoning. Will it work with Astro?
Hell yeah. Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I'd ask you to watch out for, because I haven't shot that one yet, is how many chromatic aberrations do you have at the corners? If you're shooting at 1.2, you probably have chromatic aberration, not barrel distortion or pincushion distortion. I'm talking about chromatic aberration. So do the stars look funny? At 1.2, they might, but at 2.8, that might go away. So you got to shoot through all of your f-stops, every third of a stop, with a star field in focus to see where that disappears. Otherwise, you're going to love using it. 14 millimeters is great for a giant star field, especially if you're trying to shoot the core of the Milky Way.
Yep, you can get the whole. And then I see. Oh, I haven't shot the Aurora before, Matt. Have you?
Oh, I have. Chris asks, the beginner here and interested in shooting Aurora, advice on settings and lens. So the Aurora is tricky. You need to shoot short shutter speeds. So static tripod, you don't really need to track for that. You're going to shoot 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or 8 seconds. Every Aurora burst is different. So you need to test through and see. You're not going to shoot 20 seconds because all the colors will blur together. And if you have pillars, they'll just blur together. So it's going to be shorter shutter speeds when you have Aurora, and tons of them. Just keep shooting because they're all going to look different. And you can use your iPhone for that. Yeah. But settings we talked about, a lens, whatever's big enough to cover the Aurora. If you want to shoot just the Aurora, if you want to have the landscape in, have a third of that, you could shoot 24 millimeters, you could shoot 15 or 14. A lot of sky is good, but it depends on where you are too. If you're really far north, you're going to have Aurora up in the sky. If you're like I was a month ago in Acadia, it's down near the horizon. So it all depends on where you are.
And I would think Aurora, when we're talking at certain astro shots, obviously you're not worried about environment because you're in the galaxy, literally. But on something with like the Aurora, might it add more interest if you're able to incorporate it into a scene with a wider lens?
Yeah. Astro landscape would be more appropriate with Aurora, because it wouldn't exist without the Earth. So I think contextually having the Earth and the sky together makes more sense.
I like that.
Glad we have
telling a story, around. Matt. Always telling a story.
Yeah, like don't leave it up to me, and don't leave it up to me and Scott. Nobody would be learning about astrophotography.
I'll teach you guys.
I think I saw one more question come across in the Zoom Q&A. It was more of a product question.
Oh yes, we do. We have Dr. Stephen Gottlieb.
Do the knobs interfere with one another to prevent looking straight up? Okay, so you're talking about zenith shooting. Basically with the Polaris, so we ran into that problem early on, where basically the knobs on the pan would come back and hit the knob on the the tilt would hit the knob for the pan. Basically what we did is it was a software fix. We were able to, in the menu settings on the app, you were able to turn the Astro motor slightly over. It was one toggle, and it turns the Astro motor, and then the pan will actually rotate basically compensate for that, so it wouldn't hit once you're looking straight up. So yes, we were able to fix that.
I think that what Mike just said, there's something else buried in there that everybody should be aware of.
Yeah.
The Benro Polaris is under constant development. There are regular updates to the app and to the firmware in the product itself. It's amazing how this product keeps on growing. And it's there's not a lot of products out there that have this sort of urgency to get better all the time behind it. And a lot of people who originally got it through the Kickstarter are enjoying the benefits of that right now. So I love it when a new update comes out, because sometimes there's new features too.
There's another one coming soon, Matt.
Nice.
Perfect. Well, Mike, Matt, thank you guys so much. And of course, a huge thank you to Benro for sponsoring today's event. We have the websites right there, nationalparksatnight.com and benrousa.com. If you guys need more information, feel free to reach out to one of these gentlemen. I'm sure you're going to see them back on here in probably a matter of weeks, if that. So we'll work. We'll see. Mike's like, wait, what? Nope. Now, hey, when you're good, you're invited back. It's like family dinner. Awesome. But now, huge thank you to you guys again for all the information. We're taking notes over here as always. But that's it. Another round of the B&H virtual event space is in the books. We'll catch y'all next time.